Hi, I'm Jamie Wright, middle school librarian, and I'm here to help you find your next great book. Today's book talk episode features books about witches and witchcraft. Let's get started. First up, we have The Girl Who Drank the Moon by Kelly Barnhill. It's so much easier from the outside to see that a system or tradition is broken or nonsensical. It's much harder to change from the inside once a broken system is in place, especially if someone corrupt is in power. The Protectorate is a community run by leaders called elders, and once a year they have a day of sacrifice, where the youngest child in the community is left out at the edge of the forest for the witch. They believe that if they don't do this, the entire community will be cursed and suffer greatly. But of course, as families lose their children to this tradition, they are already suffering. There is, in fact, a witch, and she does come to collect the children on the day of the sacrifice, but she thinks the community is really foolish and she wishes they would just stop leaving kids out, and she actually takes them to a neighboring village where kind families adopt them. This year, though, the little girl being left out for sacrifice is so charming that something about her captures the witch's interest, and through a mistake of magic, the little girl drinks some of the moon. Now the little girl will grow up with magic in her, and since she's responsible for the mistake, and maybe because she already loves her a little bit, the witch decides to take this girl home and train her to use that magic. This book is on the longer side, and it shifts viewpoints between several different characters, and the reader doesn't really know how they all fit together until later in the story, so it requires some commitment to read. It is fast paced and it's very unique. It's a fantasy story with a dystopian community and a book that questions power and corruption with a prankster baby magician. It's a book that's humorous and dark and beautiful and painful. It has some of the loveliest sentences ever, and it's not hung up on long, detailed descriptions, and it manages to make all that work. This book was a Texas Bluebonnet selection, which is aimed for third through sixth graders, but I think it's better suited for older readers just because it raises a lot of interesting and complex questions about ethics, like who has power and who should have it, and what people will do to keep their power, along with questions about the nature of family and sacrifice and ambition and resilience. Although it's a fantasy because it features magic users, I think it's more of a dystopian novel that has magic in it. It's fascinating, beautiful, and a really unique read. This book is called The Wildseed Witch by Marti Dumas. I love the cover of this book. It's gorgeous. This book is set in New Orleans, and a short summary might be that it mixes Harry Potter and Mean Girls. The main character, Hassani, is a YouTube makeup influencer who is suddenly accepted into a school for magic users. Unlike a lot of her classmates, she hasn't grown up with magical parents, so she's a wild seed. The school is part magic and part charm school, so she has to learn the proper way to eat dinner and attend tea parties and not let her magic take over or run wild. A lot of the other girls, including some of her roommates, dislike her, and some of them even actively sabotage her. Hazani just wants to be accepted by a teacher mentor who will appreciate her unique magic and be able to learn how to channel her power, but she has to demonstrate that she has what it takes to belong. This book is over 300 pages, so it's fairly lengthy, but it moves quickly, and it's the first book in a series. The next book up is called The Grace of Wild Things by Heather Fawcett. This is a fantasy book, and it's a twist on Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery with a magical environment. If you're already a fan of the Anne series, you'll find lots of wonderfully translated details in this tale, but even if you don't know that story, you can still appreciate this book. This is a longer book at almost 400 pages, and it's a Texas Lone Star book selection for the 24-25 school year. The Grace of Wild Things is about a little girl named Grace who begins the book in an orphanage where she is not very well cared for. She has always sensed that she has magic in her, so she makes her way to the woods, and everyone knows the witch lives in the woods. And Grace begs her to take her in and train her to use her magic. The witch is really grumpy and she doesn't want anything to do with this little girl, but Grace is very persistent and she shows a glimmer of talent, so finally they strike a deal. If Grace can learn and perform 100.5 spells correctly by their agreed deadline, Grace can stay. At first, this seems like it will be nearly impossible. The spells are tricky and even finding the ingredients is very difficult. But Grace makes a friend or two and she starts to get some help collecting ingredients and working together, and she starts to build her skills. She even starts to help the witch, and she knows she's done a good job when she gets a grunt response instead of outright criticism. But someone from the witch's past shows up and threatens to destroy everything about the new life Grace has been building. There might not be enough magic to stop it. And the next book is The Thickety, A Path Begins by J.A. White. This is the first book in a series recommended by a former student of mine. This was her absolute favorite of all books at that time. It does have a darker horror element to the fantasy story, so if that's something you enjoy in your books, this might be a great fit for you. It opens when Kara, who is 5 years old, is watching as her mother is on trial for witchcraft and she is executed for it. Several years later, we see Kara and her family struggling. Her father is so miserable without his wife, and he feels like he didn't do enough to save her, and he can hardly function. Her younger brother gets sick a lot, and Kara is always trying to take care of him. And they're all an outcast in the community, but especially Kara. Whether she's going to school or trying to buy food or medicine, people will trade with her sometimes and cheat her, and there's really nothing she can do about it. One day, she discovers a source of magic, and she's immediately worried. Does this mean that she's evil like her mother? And was her mother even really evil? And she wishes there's someone who could teach her how to use this magic, but nobody will really even talk to her unless they're taunting her. And with magic, there's always a price. So even when Kara decides to put magic aside, it comes looking for her, and she might not be able to control it. And if anyone finds out, she might end up like her mother. This book has a gloriously evil villain, and it has plenty of twists. It's a longer book at almost 500 pages, and it raises really interesting discussion questions like, do you have a responsibility to save a community that treats you horribly? Or are family secrets ever in anyone's best interests? It ends with a minor cliffhanger to set up the next book, but it works as a complete story on its own. That's it for this episode of Book Talks, Witches and Witchcraft. If you are in search for your next great book, please ask your librarian. And remember, a book is always a good idea.